So this video appears after a very, very long period of silence. The last year has seen me go into isolation and introspection. And as I come out of this isolation and introspection, I've realized there's been various insights from that period. And as I travel away from it, I'm finding ways to obviously verbalize what has actually happened. When I was in this period of isolation, I was asked whether I would talk about what was happening to me, to which I replied that I'm still going through the experience, and as such, there really are no words. Once I travel away from this experience, I'm sure I'll be talking more about it. This video's intent is to invite questions. It's also here is a bit of a pointer to some of the work that I do. And also an attempt to unravel this mystery that we call life. And although there really are no words to describe what's happening, maybe by using words and silence and other such tools that we can point to the reality that we actually are. I found that there's probably nothing more effective than silence, but there is a point where words do emanate from the silence, and there is speaking happening all over again, and meeting people, and sometimes just your very energy, your very field, your aura, can point back to what you truly are. And this is something that occurs with everybody, whether we're seeking or we're not seeking. So the video is really about just pointing to that. Now, what you seek, you already are, and to possibly demystify some of the ideas around spirituality, and I'm sure as this video goes on, maybe offer some pointers. As I said, it's been a period of silence which was absolutely beautiful, and there were many insights that occurred from that period. And I find myself now slowly but surely talking. I also find that I'm talking in response to the people that are around me. So I cannot really talk at a certain level if I'm speaking to somebody who's speaking to me at a certain level. So there is a kind of tentativeness in speaking, and I'm sure as instead of me speaking to the camera or it's being a one-way conversation, as the conversation, a one-way conversation, what I may find is that as questions start coming in, I will start answering those questions at whichever level that needs answering. So, for example, I remember once being asked a question about the mind, to which I replied pretty briefly that it's your mind, take responsibility for it. A year or so later, in a talk, I was asked the same question with the original questioner present, and I went into more depth about the topic. And then again, there was a talk on the Isle of Man where we looked at the topic in much more depth. And I think it tells us something about our capacity to hear, our capacity to listen. I think sometimes what we're looking to do is get all the answers all at once, and we're really probably not in that place to listen or to actually understand. But there is this impatience that I want to know what this is, and I want to wake up, and I want to realize my true nature. And I think if we can be gentle with ourselves and we can allow ourselves to go through the process that we're going through, for example, talking or writing about this or asking questions, there's this real emphasis on having to do something in society, and always having to ask questions, and always being busy, and always getting the results right now. And what we do is we take a very, very beautiful process that's occurring, and we literally tear it apart. And this last year, in this period of silence and this period of introspection, what I found was that the only thing that was going to get me through this period of introspection, because if I'm really honest, I didn't really want to be in this period of introspection, was to allow myself to really feel my emotions, to really feel my thoughts, to really feel. So if there was fear coming up, to really feel that, not to walk away from that. If there was anger coming up, to allow that to be. And I found that spirituality then for me became something very, very practical. I also started praying, which, as many of you know, I'm not particularly religious, and the simple act of washing my hands and doing the wudhu, I found more peace and solace in that than talking about the nature of reality or how consciousness is just happening. So in that sense, this spirituality that I've been pointing to for all these years became very, very alive. as I was put into a situation where I either had to sink or swim. And I found after a while, everything I'd known about the topic just got exposed as just mere words. And I found myself in a very unfamiliar place, but becoming very, very familiar with that. What was then very interesting was that people then started speaking to me. And it occurred naturally, just comments like, I've seen you somewhere before. And conversations just started happening. And I found myself really kind of battle testing my ideas as to what I think this is. I feel no one's ever perfected, and we're all perfection happening in motion. And at any moment, we're completely perfect as we are. But if we get caught in that situation, we go into this hubris that we think that we know everything. And I think it's more about embracing an attitude of humility and an attitude of not knowing, and allowing ourselves to be completely open to what's actually happening. And this was what I found, and in that sense, spirituality started becoming much more alive. I started talking in different ways, whether the person in front of me was coming from a religious angle, or whether they were coming from a non-dual angle, or a Sufi angle, or a Buddhist angle. And it made me realize that it really is about trusting. I think sometimes we're so wanting to sound right, we're so wanting to get this right, that we become a parody of ourselves. And as I've said to so many people, sometimes I just open my mouth and hope for the best. And now I'm just opening my mouth. I'm not hoping for the best anymore, because I find that if we just go with this whisper that's with us, that is telling us, well, maybe you don't want to do that, maybe you do want to do that, we open up a conversation with God. And as we open up this conversation with God, it gets clearer and it gets clearer and it gets clearer, to the point where you could be thrown into quite possibly the most dire situation that you could ever face, and you'll find hidden depths about yourself. And you'll find that this realization, I'll use the word deepening because I really can't think of anything better, but we find our knowing becoming so much more. And we see that this thing that we point to is the epitome of practicality, and that it's how we should all be living our lives, instead of being enslaved to our mind and being enslaved to conditioning or how society tells us we should live. And what we'd find then is that we'd set ourselves out on such a wonderful adventure, and we'd learn so much about ourselves. Like I said, I was put in a situation where I really couldn't escape from what was happening. So I was completely in now, and I couldn't really turn away from now. And I was put in a situation where I had to face myself constantly. And as such, these ideas started to be talked about and challenged as well. And I found a real expansiveness and a real love and a real joy in that. And now I find that I'm talking again, and now I find I'm having conversations again, and the meetings are resuming again. And this is an invitation to speak and to sit and to see whether we can take these ideas that we have about this topic of realization, and we can demystify them and see them as something as perfectly ordinary as washing your hands, as perfectly ordinary as feeling love for a fellow human being, as perfectly ordinary as having your heart broken when you leave someone, and seeing that it's life, and that we're all in this thing called life. And it's not mystical, and yet its ordinariness makes it so profound that it's so much more profound than the utterances of any mystic. And it's us, and it's occurring to us right now. And it exposes us, and it exposes our story, and it exposes our insecurities, and it shines a light on those dark places. And we, although we don't like that, we are grateful when we're cleansed over and over again. And as we're cleansed and as the veils are lifted, we clearly see the face of our beloved, and then there is really only love. So this conversation is happening for the sake of our beloved. And as such, when that beloved says speak, you speak, and when that beloved says remain silent, you remain silent. And I think that's what we've got to learn to trust now. And we've just got to go with it and see where it takes us. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like what you're hearing, please do connect up with us on social media. If you wish to subscribe, please do. And if there's any suggestions for other videos, please feel free to write into the website, fallingintothemystery.com. But I look forward to extending this conversation with you and seeing where we can go with this. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this video, and I look forward to welcoming you back home.